I don't believe that they're real a lot of the time. Now that you have a complete and polished CV and a personal statement, you have a clear sense of what your true north is, it's time to start applying to companies. So there's various ways to do this. There's LinkedIn, there's recruitment agencies, there's your own personal network. This video won't go into that because who you are, where you are, what you're looking for, and your timeline is really going to dictate which strategies you should be using. As a recruiter or headhunter for mid and senior career professionals and executives, I am very biased towards public jobs because I don't believe that they're real a lot of the time. They're posted because HR is trying to gather CVs to build up their database so that they can not pay agents like me a fee. And I am very biased toward having personal networks and connections, which is my job as a headhunter, to network behind the scenes with decision makers to know what are their real pain points, real business challenges. So I would recommend, sure, go online to LinkedIn and look at these sites and what's online, and there could be great opportunities there, for sure. However, it's your personal network, and being able to network and get a sense, get your antenna going as to where the opportunities are and hidden opportunities that might not be advertised or might not even be real yet, but they're there and they're something that's calling your name somehow, because that's going to uncover really good opportunities. But in this video, what I am going to do is give you some insights and questions to ask yourself as you're assessing opportunities, assessing companies, just to get a sense of, do they align with what you're looking for or not on a broader level. And the first thing, very simply, is, are they private or are they a public company? A public company is a company that's listed on a stock exchange like the NASDAQ or the Dow, or maybe it's the FTSE in London or Tokyo Stock Exchange. But if they're a public company, it means that they're driven by financial performance. They're driven by investors' satisfaction with their profitability, their growth, etc. So ultimately, the CEO has to deliver on what the investors are expecting, which is growth and or profit. Of course, there's growth companies, which put profits back into the business to avoid paying taxes on those profits and grow faster. And then there's dividend companies that issue dividends to investors in the form of actual money based on how many stocks those investors own. So if it's a public company, expect there to be a lot of information public about that company, and that can help you make decisions. If it's a private company, my experience is that private companies are much more culture and values driven. They're less bound to a timeline, although that's always important for business, of course, but they're more bound to the values and the culture of that company. One of my previous companies was a private American recruiting company, and the focus was very much more on people development, speaking to the heart, customer satisfaction, rather than delivering results and numbers and profitability. Of course, that was important to them too, but the theme and the substance of company meetings on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis was very much more about those values and what makes that company different. There's no right or wrong. It's just how it is. And if you consider the culture of the company that you're in right now, then that might give you a clue as to values that are important to you based on what you like and dislike. It doesn't mean that public companies are not value-centric. Many of them very much are. Johnson & Johnson is a great example. They're known for having increased their dividend every year for the past however many years, yet the credo of Johnson & Johnson is very strong and deep to be a reflection of society in terms of having a diverse balance of men and women and how they develop people and these kinds of things. So just because they're a public company does not mean they're people and values oriented. It's going to differ company to company, but this is something to pay attention to based on what's important to you. Another thing is established versus startup. If they're a startup company, then you're going to want to look at how much funding they have, and look very closely about who's on their board, because those having fewer people means that those people have a much, much bigger impact into the overall direction of the company itself. Whereas an established company, a Fortune 500, top tier listed company, is going to have a much more stable financial performance and is going to have a lot more resources and benefits to their employees, because they've had the time to scale up to a very complex organization that's going to give you as an employee, regardless of your level, much nicer bells and whistles like health insurance plans, family care, special leave, paternity leave, free food and coffee in the cafeteria, parking spots. All these kinds of things are going to be much more complex and developed the larger organization it is that you're looking at. However, the role itself can also become much more narrow, because you're like one brick in a large pyramid. So your scope of responsibility tends to become much more narrow in a big corporation compared to a startup where, let's say you're just a one-man or one-woman company, you're in charge of everything. And you probably have to outsource a lot of what you need, if not most or all of what you need. So the larger the company, the more narrow your role and the more resources, internal resources you have to work with. The smaller the company, the broader your role, the fewer internal resources you have to work with. Therefore, being able to identify mission critical capabilities and outsource those in a cost-effective way becomes a very essential skill to have, and one that is really best learned by experience. So that's where having mentors, if you're going to take that route or transition to that sort of path, becomes very critical. Financial health as well, critical to look at. If they're a public company, this should be very easy to find simply by going to their website and looking for their investor report or their corporate report. And this will outline on a yearly basis, sometimes a quarterly basis as well, what their revenues are, where those revenues came from, profitability, impacts from FX, product pipelines, etc., which is the second thing that you want to look at beyond just growth rate, like a compounded aggregate growth rate, or CAGR, it's called for short. Double digits would be a healthy, very healthy growth rate. But also the product pipeline is what a lot of people in innovative industries like pharmaceuticals or medical devices or medical technologies, they're looking for what is the company's pipeline? What new products do they currently have in R&D, research and development, that is approaching go-to-market or commercialization or launch phase? Even if they're not a maker or a manufacturer of products, they might be a software company or a service company, but what new products and services do they have in their pipeline that is coming to market soon? Because those pipelines are going to be a very clear indication based on the market they serve, the size of that market, how much competition is in there. Those are all going to be indicators of the potential growth of that company, whether it's growing or slowing. And there's companies in all parts of the spectrum, as well as M&A going on all the time. So based on the type of company you're looking at and how relevant their product pipeline is to their growth or their slowing of growth, then those are important considerations as well, because ideally you want to look for a growing company, but if it is decreasing in size for some reason or losing in growth, that means that generally there's few opportunities in that company. So unless you're looking for something super long-term that doesn't offer much growth, but really just offers comfort and stability, then it might not be the kind of place that you want to go to, because the more aggressive, ambitious professionals out there typically are looking for companies with a strong product pipeline. That's where investment is, that's where opportunities are, and that's what's going to allow you to keep developing your career without having to change companies, because changing companies, as you know, can be a stressful and overwhelming experience. Another indicator is their turnover, employee turnover. So the best way that I look at this is just by going to linkedin.com and I look at current employees, in my case in Japan, but wherever you are, you can look in your local area, United States or whichever country you're in. Just look at current employees and look at current employees within your domain or your function, such as sales or marketing, and just take note of how long have they been there. and look at a few, 5 to 10, let's say. Just open new tabs on your computer and look at how long have they been there. And if you see a trend such as, it seems like most of them have just joined in the past 1 or 2 years, or perhaps you can see that most of them have been there for 5 to 10 years. That indicates a very different type of culture and growth. So for a healthy, stable company, you probably want to see that most of them have been there 3 to 5 years, with a few that have been there a bit longer and a few that have been there a bit shorter, because that indicates a very healthy rate of growth. Whereas if there's a lot of people that have just joined, then you're probably joining a team that is going through growing pains, being able to develop the internal support systems while they onboard so many people. Are you prepared for that? Is that something that's comfortable for you? Is that something that's familiar to you? Is there a story that lines up behind that aligns with where it is you want to go in your career? Where is their headquarters or office location? That shows how the company wants to associate them with their competitors. So a lot of big pharmaceutical companies, for example, are based in New Jersey. It's called Pharma Valley, New Jersey, Philadelphia area. Some in Chicago. San Diego is a biotech hotspot. San Francisco as well, with a lot of course, that Semicon Valley, and that heart of technology has also influenced the growth of how semiconductors and computer technologies are used in research instrumentation. So there's a lot of life science companies in San Francisco that make instruments that cater to pharmaceutical companies or academic institutions for research and development. So knowing where the hotspots are for your industry, then you're probably looking for companies that are also headquartered in those hotspots. But if you see some sort of outlier there, there's a story behind that. That could be interesting. That could be an opportunity for you that to help you stand out in some way. But it may or may not align with your longer term career aspirations, your vision board. So these are just things to pay attention to and consider. What does this tell me? What does this indicate? And determine if you want to keep it on your list of companies to continue exploring or not.